Hi, and welcome to Really Understanding Incoterms 2020, a series of comprehensive masterclasses. I'm Bob Ronai. This is Lesson 13, the third and final part on DPU. But first, our disclaimer. I'm not a lawyer. The contents of this course are not legal advice. I was a member of the International Chamber of Commerce's Incoterms 2020 drafting group, which created these rules. Some of the contents are direct quotes from the Incoterms 2020 publication, number 723E of the International Chamber of Commerce. My explanations, my comments, and my opinions are based on my knowledge and my experience of over 5 decades. My intent in creating this comprehensive course on Incoterms 2020 is to ensure that my knowledge and my experience is passed on to you for a better future for you in trade. In this lesson, we'll continue to look at DPU, A10 and B10 notices, A6 and B6 delivery and transport document, A9 and B9 allocation of costs, A5 and B5 insurance and letters of credit. As always, I will explain what the book says first, which is where other trainers and YouTube videos usually stop. But then I will examine the many issues arising from these articles as we go along. A10 and B10 notices. The seller must give the buyer any notice required to enable the buyer to receive the goods. The buyer must, whenever it is agreed that the buyer is entitled to determine the time within an agreed period and or the point of taking delivery within the named place of destination, give the seller sufficient notice. The seller therefore must give the buyer notice that they have delivered or are about to deliver the goods into the destination terminal, or that they would like to deliver to the buyer's premises, depending on what the contract destination is. The buyer, of course, must inform the seller when they want delivery and to where they want delivery, especially if it is not to a terminal. A6 and B6, the delivery and transport document. The seller must provide the buyer, at the seller's cost, with any document required to enable the buyer to take over the goods. The buyer must accept the document provided under A6, but really that doesn't tell us very much, does it? In the case of delivery at a terminal for FCL or LCL, such as a container yard or a container freight station, the buyer will need an original bill of lading or a seaway bill or express release to obtain release of the goods from the terminal. In the case of delivery at the buyer's premises, the seller would need the original bill of lading to obtain release from the terminal, and therefore would need to be both the consignor and consignee on that transport document. In the case of delivery at the airline terminal for air freight, the airline will already have the airway bill. In the case of road or rail, the carrier will already have the transport document. In the case of delivery at the buyer's premises, a bill of lading or airway bill are not necessary for the buyer to take delivery, because it is the seller that is delivering to those premises. However, the buyer will need a copy of the transport documents for its import formalities, regardless of where delivery will take place. If the seller is shown as consignee, could this cause problems for the buyer to import clear? Allocation of costs. The seller must pay A. All costs relating to the goods and their transport until they have been delivered in accordance with A2, other than those payable by the buyer under B9. The seller must pay B. The cost of providing the delivery or transport document under A6. The seller must pay C, where applicable, duties, taxes and any other costs related to export and any transit clearance under A7A. And the seller must pay D, the buyer, for all costs and charges related to providing assistance in obtaining documents and information in accordance with B5 and B7A. B9, allocation of costs. The buyer must pay A, all costs relating to the goods from the time they have been delivered under A2. The buyer must pay B, the seller, for all costs and charges related to providing assistance in obtaining documents and information in accordance with A7B. The buyer must pay C, where applicable, duties, taxes and any other costs related to import clearance under B7B. And D, the buyer must pay any additional costs incurred by the seller if the buyer fails to fulfil its obligations in accordance with B7 or to give notice in accordance with B10, provided that the goods have been clearly identified as the contract goods. A5 and B5 insurance. The seller has no obligation to the buyer to make a contract of insurance. The buyer has no obligation to the seller to make a contract of insurance. However, the buyer must provide the seller, at the seller's request, risk and cost, with information that the seller needs for obtaining insurance. The seller would be very wise to arrange its own insurance if it does not already have an annual or open policy. The seller has the risk if the goods are damaged or lost in transit. The seller should also be aware that it has the contractual risk, if the goods are damaged or lost, that it may well not be able to deliver the contract goods within the agreed date or period, making it in breach of contract. DPU and letters of credit. This rule is completely incompatible with LC operations. LCs almost invariably specify a port of loading, port of discharge, latest date of shipment, and require presentation of an on-board transport document, etc. But these are all before delivery and are irrelevant to delivery. Presentation of documents under an LC for DPU would necessarily mean after the buyer has received the goods. This provides absolutely no protection for the seller and is frankly pointless. In summary, DPU is a result of renaming DAT, delivered at terminal, because of misunderstandings. DAT itself was an expansion in the 2010 version of these rules of the previous DEQ, delivered ex key. It is a potentially dangerous rule, in my opinion, to use in cross-ocean transport because it has been expanded so much further than the original DEQ to include all modes of transport. In my opinion, it should be avoided for FCLs, LCLs, or air freight. It does not work with the usual format of LCs. Next lessons. In the future lessons, I will discuss questions raised so far about the any mode or modes rules, EXW works, FCA free carrier, CPT carriage paid to, CIP carriage and insurance paid to, DAP delivered at place, DPU delivered at place unloaded, and DDP delivered duty paid. I'll also explain FAS free alongside ship, FOB free on board, CFR cost and freight, and CIF cost, insurance and freight. If you like this lesson, please click on the thumbs up button below. If you'd like to be alerted to each new lesson, please hit the subscribe button and the bell. And please feel free to leave any comments and questions relevant to this lesson below. Till next lesson.